This morning, I want to look at this passage of Scripture in the book of Genesis, chapter number 32. And I'm going to begin at verse number 22. But before I take us to the text, I want to just kind of give a little bit of background. I want to kind of catch you up a little bit to where this text begins and some of the things that preceded this text that will help us better understand what's happening here. How many of you are familiar with a guy by the name of Abraham? Anybody heard of Abraham in the Bible? A little bit of Bible study here. Abraham married a woman. Do you know what her name was? Sarah. We got some Bible scholars. Abraham and Sarah. Abram was his name. Sarai was her name. And God approached Abraham and made a covenant. He made a binding agreement with Abraham, and he says to Abraham, he says, I'm going to bless you. And the way that I'm going to bless you is that through you, the entire world is going to be blessed. Your descendants are going to be like the sand on the sea, the stars in the sky. In other words, he says, you won't be able to number, you won't be able to count your descendants. Well, this doesn't sound maybe so amazing to us, but it had to sound very amazing to Abraham and Sarah. One was because she was beyond her years of childbearing. But even when she was in her childbearing years, she was barren. She wasn't able to have children. And so here God shows up. She had been barren all of her life. Now she's beyond childbearing age. And God says, you're going to have a baby. Well, as you can imagine, they just couldn't believe it. It was hard for them to believe. But lo and behold, God, when he speaks something, he has a way of bringing it to pass. So Abraham and Sarah, they have a baby. And God says, hey, you're going to be blessed, and I'm going to bless you. All the nations are going to be blessed because through your lineage, the Messiah is going to come. It was through the lineage of Abraham that Jesus was born. Abraham and Sarah have a baby, and you know what their baby's name is? Huh? Isaac. I was waiting for somebody to say Jesus. Their baby's name was Isaac. And Isaac married a woman. Remember what her name is? Rebecca. Abraham and Sarah had a baby. Their baby's name was Isaac. Isaac married Rebecca. Isaac and Rebecca had two sons. Do you know what their names were? Esau and Jacob. They were twins. And they had twins. And Esau was the older of the twins, and Jacob was the younger. Genesis describes the birth as Esau, as he came out, and he was a very hairy baby and had a reddish look to him. And as he came out, Genesis says that Jacob clutched his heel as Esau was going out. That's how Jacob came out, clutching the heel of Esau. Esau is described as a hunter. He was an outdoorsman. He was sort of the rugged type. He was the athletic type, and he was a hunter. That's how he spent his days and his energies. I imagine he probably went on hunts that took him away from the family, away from their territory for maybe days, weeks, maybe even sometimes up to a month to go out hunting. Jacob, on the other hand, is described as somebody who's more of a homebody. He's more around the house. He's just known for his cooking. He was a chef, if you will. He was probably more on the artistic side. He's probably more on the creative side. He was probably more of a thinker, while Esau kind of relied more on his brawn. One day, Jacob and Esau were at the house, and Esau was out hunting on one of his escapades, going out hunting, and he comes back and he is starving. Well, Esau describes it as he feels like he's starving to death. He's so hungry. Well, he gets to the house, he says he smells Jacob's stew. He smells this stew that Jacob is making, and he gets to the house and he says, Jacob, I am starving to death. I've been out hunting. I've got to have some of this stew. Well, Jacob, not only is he artistic, but he's a little crafty, deceitful, sneaky. He says to Esau, Esau, I'll give you some of my stew if you give me your birthright. Now, for some of us, we're saying, give him the birthright. What's a birthright? The birthright was something that was pledged, that was given to the oldest son. The birthright entitled the oldest son to be the next leader of the clan. He would be the one to inherit the leadership role. He would be the one to inherit the large portion, the double portion of the inheritance of all the land, of all the herds, of all the wealth that the family had. Having been the firstborn, that right of the birthright entitled him to that. But Esau, in his hunger, decides that he would sell it to his brother, give it to his brother for a pot of stew. We got to be so very careful about living for the moment at the expense of your future. And what Esau did was he was so focused on gratifying himself for the moment that he wagered his future for it. That's a message for the young people, because sometimes we can get so caught up in the now that sometimes we'll allow our appetites, some of them good, some of them bad, but we'll allow an appetite to cause us to forfeit our future because we become so short-sighted. Well, he makes this deal, and Esau says, here, you can have the birthright. Well, it comes time where Isaac is on his deathbed. Isaac is up in age. He's about to die, and he calls, obviously, his son Esau. He calls his son Esau to his bed and says, Esau, I'm at the end of my life. I'm on my deathbed. What I want you to do is I want you to go out and hunt and get some game, and I want you to make my favorite meal. And when you come back, I am going to bless you. I'm going to give you the blessing that you deserve as my firstborn. Well, he goes away, and while he's away, to make a long story short, Jacob conspires with his mother, and they get together, and Jacob pulls together a meal, disguises himself, goes into Isaac, because Isaac couldn't see very well at this time. He had been going blind. He was an old man. He couldn't see well. Jacob goes in there, disguises himself, brings the meal, feeds the meal to his father, and steals the blessing from Esau. Well, you can just imagine when Esau gets back to the house and he's preparing this meal, and he goes into his dad, and his dad is saying, who is that? And it's me, Dad. I prepared the meal that you asked for, and I'm here to get my blessing. And his dad is sad because he says, I've already given the blessing away. Esau becomes enraged. Esau decides in his heart, he says, you know what? As soon as my father dies, I'm going to kill my brother Jacob. Well, Jacob gets word that his brother wants to kill him, and you know what Jacob does? Leaving on a Jacob decides, it's time for me to go. Packs up his belongings. His mother says, hey, go to Laban's house. Go over there. You can live over there. You can stay over there. Well, the story goes, Jacob packs up. He goes over to Laban's, and he runs into this woman by the name of Rachel. Well, Rachel was fine. She was a beautiful woman, and Jacob falls in love with her and goes to Rachel's father, Laban, and says, Laban, I got to have this woman. I want to marry her. Well, what would it take for me to marry your daughter? Remember those days when you'd have to offer dowries to fathers for their daughters? Brothers are like, don't bring that up, Pastor. We'd have to offer dowries to the father to have their daughter's hand in marriage. Well, Laban says, here's what you have to do. You have to work for me for 7 years. If you work for me for 7 years, then if you agree to that, you can have my daughter's hand in marriage. Well, Jacob says, hey, I'm willing to do it. I will work for you for 7 years. And so they put together a wedding ceremony. And that night, the night of the honeymoon, when they're supposed to consummate their marriage, guess who shows up in Jacob's tent? It wasn't Rachel. Come to find out, Rachel had an older sister named Leah. Now, I don't know how true this is, but some people say Leah wasn't as fine as Rachel. I don't know. I wasn't there. But nevertheless, it wasn't Jacob's choice. So Jacob says, what happened? I agreed to work for 7 years for Rachel. Why are you sending me Leah? And Laban says, well, and here's Laban tricking Jacob now. And Laban says, well, it's our custom that we can't marry off the younger daughter without first marrying the older daughter. So Laban says, if you be willing to work another 7 years, a total of 14 years, then you can marry Rachel. I should put a little pen mark here just to kind of pause here to just say, sisters, if he's not willing to go through the trouble, then save yourself the trouble. But that's another message for another time. Because Jacob says, oh, no problem. I will work if it means 14 years for now, Rachel had to be a bad, what you said? She had to be something else. Or he just knew what real love was. And he was willing to do whatever it took for his woman. That's another message in itself. But I just figured I would just drop that little nugget there for those of you who are dating or considering dating or looking at somebody, that make sure that he's willing to go through the trouble or save yourself the trouble. Because if he won't work for you now, oh, okay. Yeah, they're like, don't mess with that, Pastor Leo. Just leave that alone. You were doing all right till you started. So here Jacob is, and he finally got what he wanted. He has Leah and he has Rachel. And he's working now. He's working these 14 years. Well, over the course of time of him working for Laban these 14 years, Laban begins to prosper. And I mean prosper. His herds are growing. He's gaining wealth and prosperity. Things are going absolutely wonderful for Laban. And Laban goes to Jacob and he says, hey, Jacob, man, everything is just absolutely wonderful. We are prospering. We're just booming out of the seams. And I know it's a result of what you're doing here and the contributions that you have and the leadership and the work that you're doing. He says, what do I need to do so that you'll never leave? That when your time is up, that you won't leave. And Jacob says, hey, listen, you know what? Here's what we'll do. We'll make a deal. I'll leave you all of the good sheep and the goats that have no blemishes or no marks. I'll just take the ones that are speckled and spotted. Whatever sheep, whatever goat now moving forward that are born and they have speckles or spots or blemishes, those are the ones that I'll take. Well, guess what started happening to Laban's flock? Guess when they started having sheep and goat, guess how they came out? Speckled and spotted. And Jacob started putting some things in the water and setting things up so that now all of the animals that were born came out speckled and spotted. And so now Laban is looking, he's saying, hold up, wait a minute. What's going on? I was growing and amassing all this wealth. Now I'm looking, and Jacob now is amassing a wealth greater than even mine. Well, Laban starts looking at Jacob a little cross-eyed. He starts looking at him with a little bit of contempt and a little bit of resentment and a little bit of anger. And Jacob begins to sense that, and he begins to see that. And Jacob decides, you know what? It's time for me to get to stepping. And the Lord speaks to Jacob and says, Jacob, you're going to leave, but this is what I want you to do. I want you to go back to your home country. I want you to go back to your homeland. I want you to go back to where Esau is. So one night, Jacob gathers all of his belongings. He gathers his wives and his children. He gathers all of their possessions. He gathers everything that they have, and he sneaks out in the middle of the night, doesn't tell Laban. Well, the story goes on to say that as he goes out there and Laban gets word that Jacob has left, Laban goes after him, catches up with Jacob, finds Jacob, and says, how could you do this to me? How could you take all of these cattle and all of this wealth and in the middle of the night leave and take my daughters and my grandchildren? Why would you do this? And he's infuriated with Jacob. And long story short, they talk it out. And Laban agrees not to injure, not to harm Jacob. And Laban says goodbye to his family. He goes back home. And Jacob decides to move on from there. Jacob leaves there and he goes to a place called Mahanaim. Mahanaim means two camps. Jacob takes all of his family, all of his belongings, and he shows up to this place called Mahanaim. When he's at Mahanaim, he sends one of his servants to tell word. He says, go to Esau and tell Esau I'm coming home. Well, Esau gets the word, and Esau gathers 400 men. Now, these aren't 400 men that are part of the welcoming committee. These are 400 mighty men. These are 400 soldiers. These are 400 bloodthirsty guys that he gathers together. The servant comes back and says, I went and told Esau you're coming. And Esau gathered 400 men, and he's coming to meet us. Jacob is horrified. Jacob is absolutely scared. And here's where we pick up in Genesis chapter number 32, starting at verse number 22. Are you there? Follow with me. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. Say alone. And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. The man asked him, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask me my name? Then he blessed them there, so that Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, it was because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. This is the word of the Lord. So here Jacob is in this strange place, this place that Mahanaim, that means 2 camps. Jacob divides half of everything he has. He splits everything into 2 groups. And his hope is, well, if Esau's coming, and if I can divide everything into 2 groups or to 2 camps, then maybe and I'll send one at a time, that if he attacks the first one, then maybe the second one has a chance of getting away. Jacob is at this place of 2 camps. He's pretty much at a crossroad in his life. I don't know if you've ever been there. He's at a crossroad in his life. He's between 2 camps. He can't go back from where he came from. He can't go back to Laban because Laban is disgusted with him. But he's afraid to go on forward to where God is calling him because he's not sure what that's going to mean. In other words, Jacob is between a rock and a hard place. He's at a fork in the road. He's at a place of indecision, but he's got to make a decision. And the Bible says that he sent everyone across the ford and he got by himself. Would you shout, by myself? And here's the part of the story that surprises me. Here's the part of the story that it doesn't line up with my expectations of God. It brings to bear my theology and how I understand God operates. Because it says that Jacob was alone and night had fallen and he probably couldn't sleep and he was up all night, and someone shows up to wrestle him. Can you imagine Jacob stressed out, full of anxiety, not sure whether to go forward or to go back, needing some comfort, needing some strength? He hears that Esau's coming with 400 men, and God shows up. But God doesn't show up to fight for Jacob. He shows up to fight with Jacob. He shows up to fight against Jacob. Now, I'm completely floored now because the God I know, we always think of him showing up when we're in a battle and him fighting for us, that him going against our enemies. But what do you do when God shows up to fight, but it's not against your enemies? He shows up to fight with you. The Bible says Jacob started wrestling with God. And I'm sure initially Jacob probably didn't know who it was. Maybe he thought it was Laban showing up. Laban came to get me. I got to fight for my life. Or maybe he thought maybe Jacob had shown up. But he discovers and realizes that it's not Laban, it's not Esau rather, but he's wrestling with God. The Bible says he wrestles all night. Now, I don't know if any of you are familiar with wrestling, if you've ever wrestled. In high school one year, I think it was my junior year, I said, you know what, I'm not going to go out for the basketball team. I'm going to go out for wrestling. I had never wrestled a day in my life. And the coach was very excited about me coming, and I show up to this room, and it was hot in the room. There were mats in the room. I want to say it smelled like a locker room, but it smelled like a locker room on steroids. And there were a bunch of guys in there, locked up with one another. And I was new to the team, and so the wrestling coach says, come with me, we're going to just kind of go through some moves. Okay. He grabs me. Now, this guy was some type of wrestling guy in college and won some stuff and so forth. But I'm thinking, I'm from the hood, okay? So if you roll up on me, we're going to get into it. He grabs me. And unbeknownst to me, I noticed that both my feet are no longer on the mat. And I don't remember jumping. I don't remember doing anything out of the ordinary. And the next thing I know, I'm on the mat. And this sweaty body is on top of mine. Now, here's what went through my mind. I don't know you like that. I don't know you like that. And now you're grabbing me in places that I didn't invite you to grab. He's sweating on me. And I'm sweating now. We're exchanging sweat right now. I know I didn't sign up for this. But now my hood instincts are kicking in. Like, it's survival now. It's on. I know you're the teacher and all, but it's about to be on. And I'm trying to maneuver, but he's doing another move. Now he's using his legs and wrapping them around my legs and doing stuff that I had never. And now we're wrestling and we're grappling. And the object of wrestling is to try and gain control over your opponent. And he's doing half Nelsons and he's calling stuff out as he's doing. Now I'm about to do it. He's all calm. Now I'm about to do a half Nelson on you. And I'm like, ah! And I'm grabbing onto him and I'm just trying to grab on for dear life. And we're going at it. And it's like 3 minutes in. Now I can't breathe. I can't even breathe. But the experiences are very up close. You don't wrestle someone from a distance. You've got to lock up with them and get close. And what God does with Jacob is he says, he comes and he initiates this contact with Jacob. And he locks in with Jacob, and Jacob begins to lock in with him. And they begin to tussle and wrestle throughout the night. Well, it starts to get really crazy to the place where now God says, all right, Jacob, it's over. Let's stop. And Jacob says, no. I'm not going to stop now until you bless me. And then the Bible says that God touched his hip. Another translation, I would even beg to say a better translation, says that he struck David's hip. I'm saying David now. He struck Jacob's hip to the place where he struck him so hard that Jacob was injured, crippled him. Can you imagine God striking you to the place where he cripples you? Here's where I'm going. Here's where I'm going with this. What happens when God shows up? He's not showing up to fight for you. He's coming for you. He's coming to lock up with you. He's coming to wrestle and pull you in close. Here's what happened to Jacob. The first thing was God changed his name. You see, Jacob means heel grabber. Jacob means deceiver. And that's how Jacob knew himself. That's how he lived, as someone who was deceptive, someone who had to be a trickster, who had to do all of these things. But God says, I'm going to have to grab you and wrestle you to the place of exhaustion, to the place until I wrestle out your old identity. You see, sometimes the way that God changes us, he can't do it from a distance. He's got to literally grab you and wrestle you and manipulate you to say that used to be who you are. But now I want to change your name. And he changes his name to Israel, and Israel means Prince of God. He says, you used to be a deceiver and a conniver, but now I'm making you a Prince of God. Some of us, the only way that he's going to change our name is when we get by ourselves. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have sometimes is some of us, the truth of the matter is we're afraid to get alone with God. Because we're not sure what he's going to say when he shows up. We're not sure what he's going to do. I'm sure Jacob didn't anticipate God showing up and doing this. And some of us are afraid, and we insulate ourselves with so much stuff because we don't want to hear everything that God has to say. We don't want to know because God may show up and he may show up to injure us. That's my second point. When he shows up, he touches you. And you know when you've been touched by God because it changes everything. Here's the thing about when God touches you. You know what we do with things that are broken? We throw them away. God only uses broken things. He only uses broken people. He only uses people that walk with a limp, who are crippled, who have to get assistance even to walk. Jacob used to run on his own, but now he needs help just to walk. What are you saying, Pastor Lil? What I'm saying is some of you, you've been running on your own strength. You've been running in the direction that you want to go in, and you've been doing it your way. But when you get into a wrestling match with God, he will break you to the place now where you can't walk without his assistance. You can't walk without leaning on him. You can't walk without trusting him. You can't take a step unless God be with you. I can't go another place. I can't take another step. I don't want to go anywhere. I'm vulnerable now. And I need you to walk with me. He'll break you because God only uses broken people. Some of us, we rather stand in our own strength than to risk God's breaking. I want to challenge somebody here today who's been standing on your own and you feel like you don't really need God. That I don't really need to get that close to God, that God would have to be up in my face and where he can get his hands on me. And I've come to tell you today that God is calling you closer. I know you're afraid to get alone. It's hard for you to pray. It's hard for you to spend a lot of time in prayer because you got so much running through your mind. You feel like you're in that place of two camps and you're between and in betwixt and you don't know whether or not to go back to the old way you used to live because it was comfortable, because there were some good things there, and you're afraid to go forward because you don't know what it means if I completely walk away from the old. And God's saying, but if you get close enough, I'll injure you, but you'll go further. I'll injure you, but you'll be the healthiest you've ever been in your life. I'll injure you, but you'll be stronger. He'll change your name. Then he'll touch you. And then lastly, he'll bless you. He'll bless you. He'll bless you. Here's what I love about this particular piece. If you notice Jacob's life, Jacob had a lot of blessings. He had the birthright. He had the blessing. He was worked for Laban and was blessed. But here's the thing about the blessings that Jacob had. Jacob had to orchestrate all those blessings. And because he orchestrated them, those blessings came with pain. Those blessings came with disappointment. Those blessings came with some hurts. They were short-lived. But when God blesses you, Proverbs says he makes us rich and adds no sorrow. Some of you have been doing everything you can because you want to be so blessed. And if it means cheating, even if it means cheating God, I'm willing to do it because I want this, or I want to live this way, or I want to be perceived this way. And God is saying, if you would allow me to bless you, the blessing that I bring into you, you won't have to connive for it. You won't have to cheat for it. You won't have to cut corners for it. You won't have to forfeit your future for it. But this blessing will make you rich. And I'm not necessarily talking about material things. Because listen, anybody could get a car. All you need is good credit, a job. Right? Some of y'all got cars now. You can't afford them, but you got them. Right? You can get a car. You can get a house, right? You can get a house. Anybody can get a house. But the things that, and don't get me wrong, those are wonderful things to have. I thank God for the cars, and thank God for the houses, and thank God for the clothes, and being able to go on vacations, and after these 21 days, go to restaurants, all those different things. But God blesses you with things that money could never buy. What would you give for peace? I'm talking about real peace. I'm talking about joy. I mean, what would you give for, can you put a price tag on joy? Imagine what your life would look like if every day you lived in joy. Because some of y'all do more complaining. Good Lord. What would your life look like full of love and grace and mercy? Those are the blessings that God bestows upon us. And then those are the blessings that make us rich and add no sorrow. But you got to be willing to get along with God. Not just get along, but then you've got to be willing to stay there long enough. The Bible says it took all night. Some of us, we get down there just long enough to get our part out. See ya. Sometimes you got to stick down there long enough so that God can get his hands on you. So that God can begin to manipulate you and hold you and grab you and touch you in areas that only he can. And restore things. And sometimes he's got to break some things to bring progress into your life. But in the end, it's working for your good. Would you bow your heads and pray with me? Father, there's somebody here today that's in a place of two camps. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to decide which way to go. They've been running and running and running and running and running, but seemingly ending up at the same place, the place of disappointment, the place of not enough, the place of pretending, the place of hunger and thirst. But your word says that if we come to you, that we would hunger and thirst no more, that you would satisfy us. You would satisfy us not just with natural things, but you would satisfy us with you. You would become our prize, our satisfaction.